Thank you very much, Graham, and to all the brothers and sisters on here tonight. Peace and light to everyone, wherever you are. And thank you very much for having me here and lending your ear this evening. I'm not here, let me just be clear up front, to speak as an expert on anything, and certainly not as a victim. I am speaking from the perspective of someone who was born in Trinidad and Tobago, 1972, immigrated to the US in 1979 at the age of 7 to Brooklyn, New York. 8 years after doing very well in school, running away from home to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, about 250 miles away, with a childhood buddy, joining a gang, and for the next 4 months or so, being holed up in fortified row homes, selling cocaine, out of these homes for this gang. In fact, mostly everyone that was working for this gang was runaway children from all over the world. One fateful night in one of those houses, a tragic and very explosive act of violence took place between the three of us, myself, who would become my co-defendant, the same childhood buddy that I ran away from home with, and someone else that worked in the organization. He was 2 years older than us at the time, but in hindsight, at 17 years old, he was a baby just as well, and himself a runaway. I believe that I was the worst person in the room that night, because I was the one that felt that I had the most to prove, that I had to prove that I wasn't a chump, and that I wasn't a coward, and I wasn't a sucker, so to speak. My co-defendant probably would argue differently from his own perspective, but from my perspective, I felt as though I was the most responsible one in that space. I would be sentenced for that crime at the age of 15 to life without parole. In Pennsylvania, mind you, life without parole is not where you do 20 years or 25 years or any number of years, and then you're eligible to see the parole board. In Pennsylvania, life without parole means just that, life without parole, and you're sent to prison permanently, effectively to die, which is why perhaps the sentence is more increasingly known throughout the state now as death by incarceration, and not so much as life without parole. For a growing number of people believe that how can any sentence so associated, so as final as death, should be called life. And so that was my sentence. And just to preface my conversation here with you all tonight, I just want to say that is why when I say I appreciate being here, that's not just being polite. I'm not just saying something nice. I mean, I appreciate being here from a place that's deeper than many of you might imagine, because I'm not supposed to be here. The only reason I'm here is because of some US Supreme Court rulings that came down, beginning with Miller versus Alabama in 2012, that said that it's unconstitutional to sentence children to mandatory life without parole, followed by Montgomery versus Louisiana in 2016 that said that ruling is retroactive, and children who were so sentenced should be resentenced, considering a wide latitude of mitigating factors. And so I was resentenced on July 24th, 2017, made immediately eligible for parole, and released on December 28th, 2017, exactly 30 years and 3 months later at the age of 45. in December this year will be my 4th year home. I've since gotten married, and I now have a son that's 2 years and 7 months old. And so I'm speaking from that perspective, still as someone who has blood on their hands that 3 decades plus in prison couldn't wash off, and no amount of good that I have done or ever will do will ever be able to wash off, because there is no statutes of limitation on a human life. I'm speaking from that perspective. While in prison, I've sought to regain my humanity and moral rectitude and continue the advocacy that had began in prison, as I learned to advocate for the humanity of others. But over the years, I've seen younger people like myself being marched through the prison gates in orange jumpsuits and shackles and chains with blood-stained hands like myself, and no idea of the hand that's rocking their cradles, and without any clue on how to begin the exploration of accountability for the harm that they cause, right? And over the years, growing and increasingly in regret, right, for the harm that they cause, but having no clue on how to own up to that, right? On how to help bring balance back to where they might have left a family life, a neighborhood, an entire community in a state of imbalance. And so through my studies, I would go on, by the way, to read hundreds and maybe thousands of books behind the prison walls. And on that vigorous and voracious, quest or appetite for knowledge, searching for something to help me make sense of the situation that I found myself in, right? To help me make sense of, what I had done that led me there, and what I had done to make me unrecognizable to my own mother. I would encounter teachings of restorative justice, right? Teachings about Ubuntu, teachings about the Gacaca courts of post-genocide Rwanda, teachings about the peacekeeping courts of the Navajo, right? Learning about the concept of Ngwamizen, of the Odipe people, which means to tread lightly on the earth, not necessarily to walk on eggshells, but to appreciate the relationship that we have with the world, with each other, and with the planet, right? And to tread with that kind of respect and that kind of care, right? And it was behind prison walls that I would learn about restorative justice, right? And learn to assess my life and assess the lives of the young people that would come to me for advice and seek my mentorship. It'd be through that lens that I would look at myself and look at them. And I want to be clear too, that when we're talking about violence, the kind of violence that I was in prison for, the ultimate trespass, that violence that is irreversible and irreparable, the kind of violence that so many young people I saw coming into prison for. Value-based judgments about that violence is not going to avail us anything. It's not going to help us get to the root causes of it. It's not going to help us to solve it, right? When we speak about violence, to speak about it in terms of, well, this person is wrong, or this person is bad, or this person is evil, it kind of harkens back to Molière you know, Jean-Baptiste Poliquin in his piece Molière, where a physician was asked, why does morphine make people sleep? And his response was because of its dormitive principles, right? And when you analyze that response and you look up dormitive principles or the word dormitive, it means sleep inducing. So when he was asked, why does morphine make people sleep? And he said, because of its sleep inducing principles. That's what you would call a tautologous statement. It's saying the same thing twice. And so when we ask, or when we try to dig deeper into this crisis of violence, and we interpret it, right, or we try to explain it with language like, because the people are wrong, or because the people are bad, or because they're prone to violence. Those are value-based tautologous statements. Why are the people violent? Why are their behaviors this way, right? Those are the questions that we need to ask to get down to and understand root causes so that we can get to some solutions. And it reminds me of something that physician Carl Bell said when he said, you know, if a child comes to your clinic for a rat bite and you give the child a tetanus shot and you clean the wound and give the child a tetanus shot and send the child on its way, that might make you a good doctor. But if 3 children come to your clinic for a rat bite and you do all of those things, it might make you a fair doctor. Now, if 100 children come to your clinic for a rat bite and you do all of those things, but then you don't go out into the community to find and eliminate the rat, then you should have your license revoked. And so getting down to and understanding root causes was something that I wanted to plunge myself into behind the walls, because I knew that in my community, right, in inner cities and socially toxic environments, something was biting our children, right? I knew that our children weren't bad, they weren't wrong, right? I knew that the questions that I had to ask was not the same question that the principal asks every time you come into their office facing expulsion. What is wrong with you? It's not the question that the judge will ask the umpteenth time you show up in their courtroom. What is wrong with you? I know the question that we have to ask is, what has happened to you, right? Those are the healing justice questions that we have to ask. And so even with restorative justice, and here I am now as the program manager of restorative justice diversion called Healing Futures with the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project, where the district attorney is actually turning cases over to me and the team of restorative justice for diversion facilitators that I work with to help bring young people face to face with the people that they've harmed, right? So that they could take accountability for what they've done, apologize for what they've done, and then the community working together to come up with an agreement or a restorative plan for this young person so that they can appreciate the gravity of what they've done and appreciate their valuable role in the community. Now that I'm in that position, you know, I have to entertain these questions, and I have to take special care not to allow restorative justice in this work that I'm doing to become this new way of fixing our kids. Because I know that our children don't need fixing. What needs fixing is the world that we're bringing them into, right? What needs fixing is ourselves as adults for the kind of examples we're giving them, right? What needs fixing is the society that we're leaving behind for them. We have to make sure that it's one that's conducive to them making better choices, and not one that exacerbates and exploits their vulnerabilities and then condemns them for it. It has to be a society that's not in the age-old business of the 5 insidious P's, as I call them, producing people with problems and then punishing them for it for profit. We can't be in that business. This is not the business of repairing or fixing our children, because what we see in the behaviors of our children is not the problem. What we see in the behaviors in our children is their responses to the problem. And so I also have to understand the limitations of this thing we call restorative justice. And I know that even though I wear it as a title, and even though I believe wholeheartedly in its principles, I know that this is a term that we've been using since the 70s for ways that indigenous people all over the world of all shades and hues have been living for millennia, right? And that we have to find a way to expand the boundaries or the limitations of restorative justice so that it can also address things like trauma, so that it can also address things like poverty and high unemployment rates and child abuse, right? And drug addiction, right? And racism and lack of health care and excessive police force, right? And socially toxic environments, right? I knew that in going into this work, I would have to expand my consciousness, right? And liberate this idea of justice. And this is what restorative justice also means for me, is liberating justice, freeing justice, or the concept of justice from the conceptual frameworks that it's been confined to, the colonial conceptual frameworks that it's been confined to. Because in my mind, justice is not something that's hoarded up in a building somewhere, whether we call it City Hall or the Criminal Justice Center, and then justice gets rationed out to us from this building when we trespass against each other. No, justice is how we, everyday people, meet each other, greet each other, and treat each other. How we create a culture, right, that reduces the likelihood of violent tendencies in our neighborhoods and communities. So it's with this type of consciousness that I enter this work in now. And it's really significant for me and meaningful for me as somebody who had committed the irreparable, most ultimate trespass, just being involved in the taking of a human life, leaving a tear in the fabric of life, a hole in the cosmos that never be fulfilled, to be involved in this work now to help steer other young people away from not only the jaws of the system that has a voracious appetite for their bodies, especially young Black and brown bodies in these inner cities, right? But also to help people who've been harmed to find healing, to help young people who cause harm to get what they need to repair the harm, to help communities receive what it needs to be healthy and whole. And then to help us all find the wherewithal to circle our wagons, right, together and see that those needs are met. To use this program, Healing Futures and Restorative Justice Diversion, not just as a tool to steer young people out of prison or just make sure that they don't get charged, but as a thread to weave our community together. You know, we often hear the quote or the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And the truth of that statement is not worn out by how much the statement is worn out. The truth is as solid as ever. But there is another African proverb that we don't hear enough or say enough. And that is, when a child is not embraced by the village, he or she will burn it down to feel its warmth. Right. And so this work of restorative justice diversion, this work of healing futures, right? This work of not repairing our youth, right? But helping our youth to realize that they are in a community that embraces them, right? To create spaces that that make our youth feel embraced. That is, it's what's most meaningful to me. And the way it intersects for me with education is, you know, I ran away in June of 1987, just a week before I completed the 9th grade. After doing very, very well in school, you know, being in the 90th percentile, right? After being born in an island that always had a 97 to 98% literacy rate. So education was always important in my life, but not to me. It was important because the grown people, my parents and my family and the community around me said that it was important. And in the American context, it was important to me because my mother said it was important. But after a while, the importance of education had started to fade in my mind because of something baleful that started to creep into our neighborhoods, and that was crack cocaine. And crack cocaine changed everything and everyone, whether you did the drug or not. And I never did the drug, but it changed me forever because I sold the drug. And the reason why I sold the drug was because I thought that, one, it would give me a fast track to everything that I was told that education would give me, which is nothing but material things, right? A house, a car, being independent, security, right? All the mysterious accomplishments I started seeing young people my age shining with in 1986, 1987, because of what this baleful thing tempted them and promised them to. That was the first reason. And the second reason was because of the false sense of independence and bravery and rebelliousness that it afforded me, or I thought it afforded me. Had I been given some other tools in the educational curriculum in school, and that other tools were the moral tools, right? The spiritual tools, the human tools, right? Had I been told that education is not just about learning what you needed to learn so that you can get a good job when you grow up, so that you can afford these material things, basically, the American dream. Had I been told also that education is about making socially and environmentally and ecologically responsible decisions, that education is also about looking deeply at what's wrong with the world, what's anti-life with the world, what's anti-human, what's anti-nature about the world, and coming up with ways to fix it. That's what education is about. Had I had Joel Bakan's definition or concept of education, that it's not just about training up young people to fit into the global economy, but also preparing young people to understand this economy, to question and skeptically assess its virtues and weaknesses, right? To have and pursue ideals, and to work against our apparent tendency in certain capacity to be self-destructive, right? These larger jobs of education, had I been given that, when someone came to me with the proposition of a fast track to the American dream, of an express lane to the American dream, I believe I would have been able to say, no, that's self-destructive. No, that's not helping me be an upstanding member of my community. That's not helping me at 15 years old make socially and environmentally and ecologically responsible decisions, right? And I believe that restorative justice offers that. It certainly offered that to me. And I believe that it offers that to young people. And I believe that that is the intersection between restorative justice and education, because it evolves the concept of education into a whole new thing, that education is not just about learning what you needed to learn so that you can fit into the status quo, so that you can have a good job and just afford what you want in life, but learning what you need to learn so that you can be an upstanding member of the community, so that you can make socially and environmentally and ecologically responsible decisions, and so that you can look at the world and see what's out of line with it, what's troublesome about it, what's making life an increasingly miserable affair for so many people about it, and then coming up with ways, or putting your mind and your heart and your spirit together with other people who are coming up with ways to fix it. That is the purpose of education, and that is where it intersects with restorative justice, right? And it's forward-looking and it's forward-moving, right? And so here I am today, and I'll close this out with a prayer that I was given at Yom Kippur, in my first Yom Kippur service, when I was invited to join a panel at the 2019 Yom Kippur service at Central Synagogue, which is one of the main Reform synagogues in the country, in Harlem, New York. And the service that year was about teshuvah, which means, it's a Hebraic concept that means, to return, to repent, to atone. But it was about collective atonement and collective return, collective repentance for collective sins. And the prayer is called a redemption prayer. And a friend that I made that day gave me this prayer, and it seared itself into my memory. And so it's from memory that I give it back to you. And the prayer says, you once lived in chains, beaten by failure and sorrow, your feet sunk in mortar and mud. Then one day, a strong hand gripped yours and pulled you free. You once lived in a prison house, married to your master, afraid at every turn. Then one night, a pillar of fire ignited within you, leading the way out. You once lived in another city, in another country, in a place without choices, until you chose to be free. You carried all you owned to the water's edge on your shoulders, and waters rose on your right and on your left. You once lay bound in a knot of grief, tied tight to a person who could never return, chained to a cloud, until one day you noticed that the cloud had moved behind you, urging you forward, and you turned to face the wind. You were convinced it could never happen. You thought that nothing would change, that your despair would overtake you and drive you into the sea. Then one day, today, you decided to leap forward, and you held your breath, and waters rose on your right and on your left, and your feet found dry land. We were redeemed from slavery, and we are grateful for our opportunity to be free. Help us now to embrace our responsibility to redeem others. Inspire us to do our parts in creating a world that's filled with truth, dignity, and justice. And that is the prayer. And so for me, redemption now is not this thing that I have to do. Redemption is something that we all have to do. Redemption is not just for the 2,300,000 or 2.5 million people behind prison walls or people who have done harm. Redemption is something that we all have to do as a society. Thank you so much for your time and for your ear tonight. Again, I appreciate being here.
Thank you.